So back to the chew today. What we're going to be chewing on is being true, uh, being true to who we really are, admitting where we're at. Um, Lots of times, churches don't want to admit. They want to think they've got it all figured out. They got it. They want to think that our church has got it figured out. We don't have sin in our church. We don't want to even talk about that subject. We want to ignore that subject and act like it's not even happening. I think we have multiple examples of this happening throughout, I know, my lifetime. I've seen with big name churches even lots of times when that sin gets hidden and held back, and it just festers and it gets bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden some big name preacher has fallen because they just weren't willing to admit where they were at.
Mhm.
And then a sin just grows and spreads through the church, whether it's talking about somebody else or whatever it is, because you're not addressing the issue. And when we don't address the issue, we've purposely done is we've chosen to keep something in darkness, and darkness isn't somewhere that the Spirit of God lives. God lives in light. One particular verse, John chapter 9, verse 39. This is after Jesus had healed the blind man, and then the Pharisees were getting on to Jesus because he had healed the blind man. I dare you, do that within the temple and do that on the Sabbath, or whatever excuse they came up with was a reason for them to hit Christ for doing a good thing. But verse 939 says, Jesus told him, I enter this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, to show those who think they see that they are blind. Verse 40 says, some Pharisees who were standing there by him asked, and are you saying we're blind? And Jesus said, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty, but you remain guilty because you claim you see. So he's saying it's almost better that you were blind, but you see, but you ignore the problem. Mhm. That's a problem. If we can't admit where we're at, or we can't admit we've got a sin, we got some kind of pet sin hiding within us, whether it's lust or it's pornography or any of these things. We've chosen to stay in darkness, even though we see it's there. We're covering up our sin.
Yeah, so true. When you think of secret sins, like we were mentioning earlier, is we think we can tackle those ourselves. When we know it's wrong. It's shameful. That's why we don't share it. You know, and that's why we try and heal that ourselves. A lot of times it just gets to the point where it just goes so far that you have to have help to get through it. And that's a good thing if you realize it and take that step. I think that's awesome. And you've done one thing that will ensure you're going to get through this and get over it. Uh, nobody ever starts out uh, where they end up, right? It's kind of like people that commit murder. No one wakes up one day, right? You know, it's been thought about or contemplated for a long time. I know there's obviously acts of rage that are sudden, but you know, when we're talking about things that are in secret, obviously that's a little bit out of context, but the sin of pornography, the addiction, I would say, of pornography, even alcoholism and drug use, uh, runs rampant today, and most people will try and deal with that themselves, uh, and try and just, it's kind of like the old saying, I used to say it when I smoked, and it's like, I used to say, well, I can quit anytime I want to. I've done it 100 times. We always joke about that, but there, but seeking help. And I think some of that goes back to some of our other topics. It's just trust. Who do I trust that I can bring this to? Right? I can bring it before the Lord. And frankly, sometimes we'll get in a shame position where we don't even want to bring it to Him. You know, because we're just in that condition of shame. You know, so if we don't bring it to Him, we're certainly not going to bring it to our brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And share it.
And I think that the church has been a failure in the past, not as a whole. I'll say especially like the 80s and 90s. It's like whenever someone had done something wrong, they were just completely excommunicated out of the church. So there was no openness to share the issues you were going through because of the response that the church gave. One thing that's I mean, it's bad that the church has gotten to the way it is, the world has gotten the way it is right now with sin running rampant, but the normalization of it has lessened it to where I can now come at least and I can admit where I'm at. Whereas maybe in the 80s and 90s, it was more rampant than it was really being shown. It was more hidden at that point. So I think that the church got to a point that they hid it so much that then the church kind of went downhill, and the attendance isn't what it once was, and now God's, in order to have brought us to the point to where He can heal it, He had to show that sin. That sin's now shown, and then we're seeing the youth today. A conversation me and Jeff had before is like, the college kids, even though they went into college, and lots of times colleges, teach them liberal things, there's been this movement that's happened. So, even since COVID, it seemed like that's heavy, where you see thousands getting baptized. In California, different places that's now came to the Lord because now their sin, is shown to light, and that's that very scripture that I just read. If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty. But now, you remain guilty because you claim you can see. Well, now it's just everything's being brought to light. And people don't care to share as much as they used to. So God's actually able to work in their lives for that reason.
Yeah, so true. I think about the judgment first begins at the house of God. These movements you're speaking about in California and other places in the country. Actually, there's places in the world where this is happening. A lot of times without a preacher or without a church. It's happening maybe on a college campus or something. Not that the Word of God isn't there, or maybe talked about, discussed, but in our traditional format of a church per se. But I can think of instances, and I've shared before, where I've had younger members come to me with problems, and taking it before leadership in past churches, and where leadership though just chose to ignore them. They felt the pain, but they really didn't want to walk through the pain, because it exposes vulnerability in our house, and just like us personally, and it's tough. We're only human. If we can just get past the point to realize that, just like these major leaders are speaking of, the church that fall, they fall for a reason. God has them to fall. He lets them fall to heal them, because if they continue, they'll be destroyed forever. So that, again, I'm sure those leaders, what a thing to go through. The whole world may be exposed to your acts. But what a love that God has towards us is He wants to fix the problem now.
Yeah.
And uses that to do it. There's no end to what He'll do to redeem us and to help us, and but often our brothers and sisters still have that same feeling.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just, I know even in my past, I may not know how to help someone. I may not have the training, the expertise. Sometimes it just gets to the point where you need a professional, someone who lives in that. And I just didn't have it, and maybe I chose just to kind of walk away from that seemingly, and, didn't want to. I prayed for that person, but I just didn't know really how to help them. And I didn't know really who to go to get help for them, or maybe I did in the essence I shared earlier, and it sort of got ignored, by leaders. And it's tragic. I think we're all learning from that, quite frankly. Myself, first and foremost, is don't be afraid to listen and be empathetic.
Yeah.
Because somebody may share that they're going through, you may be going through it a year from now.
Yeah.
So just understand where they are and trying to understand where they are. And you know what? Meet them where they are.
Yeah.
Meet them where they are. That's what Jesus did. I can't think of a better example of, He met people where they were. He didn't say, come unto me. But He didn't stand in the door of the synagogue and say, come unto me. He went out to where they are and met them right there, right in their circumstances, right in some places, right in the dirt they were living in.
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid to get His hands there. Right.
Right.
Uh, well, God help us. We need to take that attitude on.
Yeah. I I tell you, if all the people who have came to church before for help and they didn't get the help they wanted, so maybe they turned away and didn't come back and into the doors again because that was what they were shown like Christ was like. Because I mean, we're the church; we're supposed to be Christ-like, so
Yeah.
our response should be Christ-like. And Jesus never turned anybody away. He, um, I mean, he had his inner circle. The things that Peter rejecting him. You know, denying him 3 times.
Right.
And then him going back to Peter and saying, "No, you are my rock. On this rock I'm gonna build my church." Saying you're still part of the church. I know you messed up a little bit there, but you're still part of the church. You're still who I'm gonna build my church on.
Right. Right.
That's the attitude we need to have when people go through issues. I think also there's been times in the past you said that, if you don't have mercy on them, you may be going through it yourself in the air. I think there's been times in the past that people have come to the church, and the very people they're coming to has had the same issue, and afraid their own sin would be shown. They chose let's just not even talk about that because I don't want my sin coming out.
Well, I
Yeah.
completely agree with that. And it also can be something maybe you struggled with before and got victory on, and then that's a trigger to you. Someone comes maybe with an addiction of alcoholism or whatever, and 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 it scares you. There's that fear in that. Oh my goodness, that's a trigger. And then you start thinking about that again, and so the best thing you feel like is just to kind of get away from it. But you realize you're walking away from a person, that person that has questions, they're real.
Yeah.
They're a living soul. And, but I have seen that, and I've actually lived through that so myself, just trying to work around that, you hope you're better today, and learn from it,
Yeah.
sometimes it'll sneak up on you and surprise you. But I think in some ways too is God will bring people to you to show you that maybe have the same faults that you did, right? To something you went through. One thing to show you where you've came from, but also to show you through you that you can help someone else walk through it. You can go by it. That's right. Not of your own skill, but your skill matters. It's the power of God that enables you to walk through it and gives you the skill to help others.
Yeah. So just adding on that, you're going to fall. You're going to mess up once you get saved. You're not going to be without sin. Things are going to happen. But there's one verse in Proverbs 24:16 that always sticks out to me. The godly may trip 7 times, but they will get up again. But one disaster is enough to overthrow the wicked. So I'm going to fail. I'm going to mess up, but I am godly. I'm saved by grace, and I get up 7 times. I don't just lay there because I messed up. I get up again. That's part of being righteous. It's part of the walk. It's part of the trial that you go through on earth, and you're not going to be perfect.
Yeah, so true. I think that comes with the confidence in God, and the scriptures also says, let us boldly come to the throne of grace. That word is strong in the Greek, boldly come, it's like running with all you have, right? I mean, everything you are. It's like a marathon almost, or a sprint. Just go, leave everything behind, and come to it with confidence and trust in God, and that is some difference in between once we come to knowledge of the Lord is we should believe that the Lord can overcome anything we may face, namely ourselves, and the world will trip up on it because mainly I did not have that understanding before I came to the Lord. And I'm still working through that, by the way. You know what? I'm learning that understanding. There's nothing God can't help me overcome, but I need to bring it to him, and I need to bring it to him in that narrative that God, here it is. I need you to help me through it. Whether it's through someone else stepping in my life or just a spiritual miracle, healing, or whatever it may be, that I should have that confidence to come. Just like, he went after Peter, right? But it didn't take Peter but a second, right, to jump, and come towards him, right? Um, yeah, great scripture. And
I
one to chew on.
one to chew on for sure.
To go along with that. And certainly David, started some of that too about a good man steps ordered by the Lord, right? And he delighteth. I like that. That he delighteth. I need to delight in my way of the Lord, right? It needs to be good. We can enjoy the journey and realize, just like our work, everything I do at work doesn't always come out perfectly, right? But I'm still called to do it. And I learn from it, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't change the fact that I'm employed or that I feel like this is what I need to be doing, right? I'm going to make some mistakes. It's how I learn. I need to look at my relationship with the Lord and actually with others the same way. I'm not going to get everything right.
Right.
In fact, if I did, I'm not sure that would actually be a good thing for me to grow in, a good atmosphere. Right?
Yeah.
If all I did was play it safe,
Mm.
and I think that's where the church today, as a church, we need to quit playing it safe, right?
Yeah.
We need to realize who God is really, and there's nothing he can't overcome and do, and step out of the walls. I mean, kind of quit hiding in them, and say, please come to us to get saved, right? Like I said earlier, but yeah, it all gets back to this topic of trust, really. It's, just perfect. My faith's not perfect, but it's in the process of being made perfect.